Understanding Our Lakes, an instructional video by the Palmer Ranch Natural Assets team.
Hey there, I'm Charles Reith, and I'm a resident of Palmer Ranch. And I'm here to talk to you today about the ecological health of our lakes and what we're doing to improve them. We're trying to make our lakes better, not just for the people who live here, but for the wildlife who depend on the lakes. And better even in their ecological performance, because in making the lakes healthier, we're protecting Sarasota Bay. We're reducing the amount of pollution that goes into the bay, which makes it a healthier place. I'm a member of the Natural Assets team. That's a group of volunteers at Palmer Ranch who get together to talk about the best way to manage Palmer Ranch's natural resources. We're very concerned about the lakes. That's been our first focus of attention, but ultimately we're going to address all aspects of the environmental health of Palmer Ranch and how to improve its sustainability. Let me tell you a little bit about why this is an example of a particularly healthy lake. And the most important thing to talk about is the vegetation that you see growing in the lake. Part of this lake is shallow. We call it the littoral zone because the light of the sun goes to the bottom. And the littoral zone, these shelves of shallow water, should be populated by plants, such as you see here. You see erect, emergent plants that stick up out of the water, like these soft rushes and the larger bulrushes. And you see floating plants, like the water lilies, or where the leaves are on the water, it's rooted to the bottom, but the leaves and the flowers are above the water. And this one you see here, it's kind of a water lily, is called spatterdot. These areas are great for wildlife. And I'll show you some over there right now.
Sandhill cranes, such as this breeding pair and their two fledgling colts, are one of many species of birds that depend on this fringe of littoral zone vegetation for a significant part of their life cycles.
So the vegetation that you see in the lake is not just great for wildlife, for fish and birds and a lot of small aquatic insects and so forth, but it's removing nitrogen from the lake. Nitrogen is a fertilizer. It's good for our lawns. It makes them green, but if it gets into the water, it fosters the growth of algae. It makes the lakes get a floating mat, start to smell, not more. That nitrogen, if it begins to rain, will go with the rising lakes and the overflow into the Gulf. And the nitrogen is very bad for the Gulf. It fosters pollution. Many people say that the nitrogen going into the Gulf, along with other nutrients from our communities, are the source of red tide.
Before we continue talking about what we're doing to make the lakes healthier today, I wanted to provide a little bit of a historical perspective. And this painting by Susan Jenkins is excellent for doing that. It shows what the lakes around here used to be like, that they were really marshes or wetlands within the natural forest. Of course, we don't have to go back in time to see good wetlands. This is at one of Sarasota County's many parks and preserves. It's the functionality of a wetland system like this that we're trying to emulate as we improve our own lakes. One need only look at an aerial photograph such as this view of Myakka River State Park, just a few miles east of Palmer Ranch. Now you can appreciate how pervasive these wetland lakes really are and why it is important to restore this functionality if we're going to recreate the healthy Florida that was here before we developed Palmer Ranch.
So I've talked about the plants that are in the lake, and those are very valuable for removing nutrients and tying them up and keeping the water healthier. But how do we keep the nutrients out of the lake? After all, we fertilize with those nutrients, and animals, both wild animals and untended dogs, do their business. All of that nutrient would move into the lake if we were to mow really tight right up to the edge. So the Healthy Lakes in Palmer Ranch have a boundary zone of grasses that are relatively lightly mowed. We call this a biofilter because it filters out nutrients and unwanted sediment from getting into the lake. It's a great wildlife habitat, but it is also very effective in protecting the lake from the kind of nutrients that will lead to the growth of algae. And if those nutrients escape our lake during flood events or heavy rains where the lakes drain to the bay, then the lakes will be pure. They won't have the nutrients and transport them into the bay in a way that degrades the health of that system. This is an example of one of the healthiest lakes in Palmer Ranch. I'd like to show you a couple of lakes that don't have this useful biofilter and that don't have much vegetation in the middle. So you'll understand why that is ecologically disadvantageous, why we're trying to convert those lakes into a more ecologically healthy or functional unit, such as a properly vegetated and protected lake, such as we see here. Okay, so here we have a lake that doesn't have this comparatively unmowed biofilter. The policies here are to mow right up to the edge, which means that the nutrients that we use to keep our lawns green just wash right into the lake, and there's not a lot of the types of emergent vegetation that I was telling you about. There's not a lot of aquatic vegetation. What you're seeing here is a lot of algae, the growth of which is being spawned by this constant input of nutrients that's made possible by the lack of a biofilter such as I was showing before. I'm going to say one more thing about these biofilters is by keeping the mower right off the edge of the bank, you're protecting the bank from erosion. In other words, those heavy mowers, when they go back and forth right up to the edge of the lake, it weakens the soil, and the soil will gradually start to erode. Some of the sediment will get into the lake and it will fill up and get shallow faster. And ultimately the erosion could get so bad that you could end up seeing something like you see in the background, where you have to use some very artificial structure to keep the bank from eroding away. And I don't think any of us would really like our lakes to look like that. Okay, I'm going to end this video telling you about something I'm particularly excited about. What do you do when you have a lake like this? It's a beautiful lake, but there's no vegetation in it. There's no emergent vegetation sticking up out of the water, no floating plants. And that's because there's no littoral zone. This lake was built in a way that does not have the shallow shelves that you can have aquatic plants growing in. So what have we done instead in this lake? We have a floating island. And I think these floating islands are beautiful. They're great for wildlife, and they do for the lake just what those aquatic plants do that are growing in the littoral zone. Those islands remove the nitrogen from the lake, purifies the water, makes the water less hospitable to algae, and when these lakes begin to flow during a rain event, release their water to the bay, the nutrients that would have otherwise gone to the bay to foster pollution there, to potentially foster red tide, those have all been removed. So how wonderful is that? A floating island, beautiful to look at, great for wildlife, and great for the health of the lake. And on that note, I'd like to thank you for watching this short video. I hope I've helped you appreciate how important our lakes are as ecological contributors to the quality of life here, and now sharpened your eye for what a healthy lake is, so we can work together to make the lakes healthier at Palmer Ranch and ultimately to create a very sustainable community for ourselves and the wildlife with whom we share it. Thanks a lot.